begins. The president says that restrictions on large gatherings and capacity limits in public venues remain critical to ensure physical distancing and limit the spread of COVID-19. The president has announced that international travel will also now be permitted.
We are amending the Alert Level 1 regulations to restore normal trading hours, for instance, for the sale of alcohol at retail outlets. We are also opening up international travel to all countries subject to the necessary health protocols and the presentation of a negative COVID-19 certificate. Now, by utilizing rapid tests and strict monitoring, we intend to limit the spread of the infection through importation by those who will be traveling to our country. We expect that those measures that we are going to take will greatly assist businesses, particularly in the tourism and hospitality sectors. We are focusing relentlessly on the implementation of our plan, pursuing a few priorities with the highest impact and ensuring that we deliver on these.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says that the numbers of coronavirus infections could have been more if drastic steps hadn't been taken in the early stages of COVID-19. He, however, did say that more still needs to be done in preventing a resurgence of the COVID-19 coronavirus in the country. The president has highlighted the infections in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape as having the potential to spread the virus to the rest of the country.
What we are witnessing in the Eastern Cape should, in essence, be a wake-up call to all of us that we cannot relax and we cannot be complacent about our approach to COVID-19. We are therefore also closely monitoring developments in areas that are experiencing higher than average rates of new infections. The areas where we are experiencing higher than average rates of new infections include Lejwe and Mangaung in the Free State, Francis Bard and Pixley, Kaisa Kaseme in the Northern Cape, and the Garden Route and Cape Town Metro in the Western Cape.
Well, we're now joined via Skype by the Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute, Angelo Fick. Angelo, thanks so much indeed for joining us. The last time we spoke, it was just after the last speech by the President, and one gets a sense that the language is the same, but again we're making more and more steps towards a normal.
Yes, or what passes for a normal. Good evening, Peter, and to the viewers. My sense is that, yes, there are these tiny steps of progress towards what people desire for a return to normal. And there's a lot of hope attached to it. But there are also many, many risks that I think we face, given the warnings heeded from both local and international examples cited by the President of what could lie ahead if we do not rein in some of our excesses and activities.
So you used the word warning, and I get a sense that it was a warning for sure. And I wonder if that isn't, as we get into the Christmas period, that come January, if we haven't behaved, that he might revisit this lockdown levels.
Yes, so the lockdown levels and the crises of coronavirus infection run rampant will be visited upon us. And that might be regardless of what the president and his government may choose. December being traditionally travel season, traditionally being holiday season, the kinds of images that we're used to seeing of KwaZulu-Natal beaches or even of Western Cape beaches, of course, that's untenable. That would be unsustainable. The kind of alcohol consumption we generally see with road accident rates in December, those are also a cause for concern. And so the extension to 15 December might allow government to monitor what happens in those first 2 weeks of December and change their approach should the conditions arise that require that. If we have spikes around the country, if we have overwhelmed hospitals of the kind we see in the Eastern Cape in other parts of the country, government and South Africa as a whole will be forced to revisit the very optimistic scenario that the President sketched tonight for what could happen over the next 4 weeks.
And he also gave us another warning, preparing us. He says that, we had to put in emergency relief packages, and we need to start focusing more on recovery and winding up some of these things. I've got a feeling that some people are not going to be ready for when the tap is switched off.
Well, the tap may not even be switched off. The tap may run dry. We know that because of the economic downturn, there's also been a shortfall in revenue collection. We've heard the warning sounded in the midterm budget policy statement. And logic tells us that if there's been a downturn in income, there's been a downturn in tax payments and tax collections. And so we're likely to kind of see the issues that we've seen so far having to be revisited precisely because they're not longer-term solutions. But that does not mean that we don't need a strong social net, and that the social net shouldn't be, kind of protected at all sorts of costs. The concern, of course, should also be with the larger businesses and the multi-billionaire corporate entities that avoid paying tax rather than evade it and follow perfectly legal but highly unethical routes of moving money offshore and moving money out of reach of corporate responsibility as taxpayers. And one sees this in all sorts of changes in the economy as well, that many of the multinational global corporations that are seen as solutions to employment are tax avoidance operations in other parts of the world. And that has real civic consequences for the citizens of those spaces in which those operations run. And some of those are operations run by the wealthiest men on the planet. And they, just simply do not pay tax because they're able to exploit the legal loopholes and also the structure of international tax regimes since the 1970s with deregulation and the kinds of economic arrangements that allow people to pretend that shell companies are not necessarily taxpayers. So people may work in one territory, but the place they work for is registered as a corporation in another territory, and therefore, it simply doesn't pay tax where those people work.
So is there a danger that we're going to have a significant number of people that are not going to be protected by this social net, that, the traditional SASSA grant recipients probably will carry on, but there are those now who are unemployed because their businesses that they worked at are just not coming back, even though we might get to level zero in January?
Precisely, and this has been the warning sounded by many observers around the world from the beginning of lockdown in March, that the nature of the economy will have to change and adapt fairly rapidly, and that we've had other periods in history where this has been the case, and people have had to do this. Unfortunately, in some of those cases, we've also seen the rise of a certain kind of populist and fascist politics that we need to guard against, that our divisions are not exploited by people in their interest rather than in the interest of building a society that works for more people. And we sit in a situation where there are multiple challenges. There's the health challenge of the pandemic. There are the traditional health challenges of living in a developmental society that inherited the problems before and that constructed new problems in the post-apartheid era with underfunding, mismanagement and malfeasance, the corruption scandals that have etiolated the state. And now, in addition to that, the kind of economic crisis that has followed the pandemic, which has exacerbated the already existing economic crisis South Africa faced. And so this is a steep climb ahead, and it will require more than just government to participate. We're all going to have to rethink the ways in which we live in a society that has traditionally the highest income inequality and the highest wealth inequality on the planet. That's simply unsustainable. And in the moment of crisis, we should see an opportunity to not just gaze at that with regret, but actually to actively set about restructuring the society so that there is a more equitable distribution, not just of life chances, but actually of resources.
Symbolism is also quite a powerful thing, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on this 5 days of national mourning and flags flying half-mast, people being asked to wear black armbands for those who've lost their lives through COVID-19.
So in a country that's increasingly riven by divisions and social conflict because the resources are running scarce, I think this is government's approach to trying to build a social compact and build the kind of nationalism that has been so absent in post-apartheid South Africa since the late 1990s. But symbolic gestures, I think, need to be undercut by material changes. It is a lesson we've learned from our own society over the last 25 years that actually you can have the flag, the new national anthem, new arrangements of politics, but if you don't undo the social fabric built up by a crime against humanity, undo the spatial dynamics of apartheid, and do all sorts of other material changes to the society, you're not likely to see the kinds of social compacts needed. And that means the kind of critical literate education required, rooting out corruption, building up a proper public service, and instilling not only through the formal education system, but all of us have to take responsibility for changing our value systems away from the crass and vulgar materialism that drives and is in turn rewarded by the corruption towards a different vision of our society. And that includes the kinds of divisions across old lines of race and contestation over land. We may have to begin to think of creative solutions to those problems and realize that we all live in the same country and begin to build same communities across old lines of division so we don't have the kinds of conflicts that make dealing with a crisis even more complicated.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Angelo, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for your insights tonight.
Thank you so much, Peter.
All right, that's Angelo Fick, who's the Director for Research at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute, sharing his thoughts with us about what the President had to say this evening.